Hi, I'm the Octopus Lady, you're watching Alien Ocean, and let's talk about parrotfish today, shall we? Alright, so parrotfish. Parrotfish. These have to be one of the most frustrating animals I've ever researched for this channel. Nearly every question I had about them had no straightforward answer. Every time I thought I found a general rule that applied to all parrotfish, in came just a whole bunch of exceptions. These guys are the kings of exceptions. And in fact, you know what? I'm going to change things up today. I'm going to organize this video into what was easy to research about parrotfish and what was hard to research about parrotfish, which means that I am going to be doing things a little bit out of order than how I normally do, but don't worry. Most everything is still going to be in the same order. Okay, first thing that was easy to research about parrotfish. Where do they live in the world? They mostly live in the tropical areas of the Indian, Pacific, and Atlantic Oceans, but a few species live in the subtropics, and a few live in temperate waters. And most of them live in coral reefs or around seagrass beds. So that's that. The second thing that was easy to research about parrotfish, their excrement. Yeah, so if you've ever visited a beautiful white sand beach on a tropical island, guess what? That is all parrotfish poop. Probably, but we'll get back to that later. To explain why all of this likely came from the butt of a fish, we have to talk about teeth. Parrotfish are so called because of their teeth, which are fused in such a way that it makes them look like they have a beak like a parrot. And they have this beak because it helps them scrape off algae that grows on corals, rocks, and the blades of seagrass. There are two groups of parrotfish, the scarinine and the sparasomatine. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those words correctly, so don't quote me. With the scarinine mostly eating algae off of rocks and corals, and the sparasomatine mostly eating algae that grows on seagrass. And we're not going to be paying much attention to the sparasomatine for this part of the video, for reasons you're going to understand shortly. So within the scarinine, parrotfish are sort of broken down into two further groups, the scrapers and the excavators. The scrapers, when they go to eat some algae off a rock or coral, will use their teeth to scrape the algae off. And that can actually do damage to corals, but not nearly as much damage as an excavator. Kinda. We'll get to that in a second. But the excavating parrotfish gouge. They straight up bite out entire chunks of rock and coral when going after algae. However, some scraping parrotfish are really big. So when they scrape, they do it so deeply it looks like the coral or rock has been hit by an excavating parrotfish. So maybe we should classify that scraping parrotfish as an excavator? Maybe? I don't know, nor do I actually care, but that's why I said that scarinine parrotfish are sort of separated into two groups, because sometimes they aren't that separated. Anyway, so in case this wasn't clear, the scarinine parrotfish aren't just eating algae, they are eating algae and the rock or the coral that the algae is growing on. And quick side note, just in case you don't know, a lot of corals can be hard like rocks too. They're called, appropriately, stony corals, and when you think of a typical coral, you're probably thinking of a stony coral. Like this is a stony coral, and this is a stony coral, and they have skeletons inside of them made out of calcium carbonate, which makes them rock-like. So when parrotfish end up with a mouthful of rock or coral, that seems like a pretty big problem, right? Most animals can't eat rocks. Doing so would severely damage their teeth or their digestive system or both, but parrotfish don't have this problem. First off, their teeth grow constantly, like rabbits, so parrotfish have to eat crunchy things all the time. Otherwise, their teeth would get to be so long, they wouldn't be able to open their mouths wide enough to eat anything. Second off, all the rocks and corals they eat get ground up by their pharyngeal mill, so they don't have to deal with a bunch of stony chunks bouncing around their intestines and causing all sorts of problems. And the pharyngeal mill is this apparatus found in the throats of parrotfish. How it works, I cannot tell you because I tried reading some papers about the anatomy of pharyngeal mills, and I have no idea what any of them were saying because they all sounded like this. The large section 2 of the adductor mandibulae muscle has the derived condition of inserting on the dentary rather than the articular bone, and thus has the unusual property of crossing two joints, both the quadrate articular joint and the articular dentary joint. Which, as far as I'm concerned, is not English, and if anyone disagrees, you're gaslighting me. But I do know that the pharyngeal mill of parrotfish is really good at grinding up rocks and corals, which is why it's called a mill. Because that's what a mill is. It's a machine that grinds up stuff really well. Like if you throw wheat into a mill, it grinds it up into flour. You know windmills? Like these old school ones, not these new school ones? Throughout history, they've been used to drive all sorts of machinery, but some of them are giant wind-powered grinding machines. Hence the name windmill. Isn't that neat? Oh, and to my longtime viewers, some of you might be like, pharyngeal mill kind of sounds like pharyngeal jaws. And you'd be right. Kinda. For my non-longtime viewers, almost all fish have a second set of jaws in the back of their throat that are called pharyngeal jaws that they use to help swallow their food. The pharyngeal mill of parrotfish is a highly modified version of these jaws. And fun fact, while most fish can't move their pharyngeal jaws at all, moray eels can actually pop them out of their throat and into their mouth, kinda like the alien from the Alien film franchise. And if you want to learn more about that, check out my video about moray eels. But after you finish this one. Anyway, once the pharyngeal mill grinds up all the coral and rock and algae that the parrotfish ate, it passes into their stomach, which is non-acidic. Corals, again, have a skeleton made out of calcium carbonate, which is the active ingredient in Tums, a medicine used in America, and probably other countries, I don't know, to neutralize stomach acid. So there's no real point in parrotfish having stomach acid when so much of their diet consists of something that cancels it out. Then, in the intestines, the parrotfish extracts whatever nutrients it can get from the algae/coral/rock slurry. And then, and this is the important part, the parrotfish poops out all those rocks and corals it originally ate, which have now been processed into a nice, soft, white sand. And parrotfish can produce an incredible amount of sand. Some species can produce 23 kilograms per individual per year. Some can produce 380 kilograms per individual per year. Some produce 1,000 kilograms per individual per year. But the largest parrotfish in the world, Bulbometapon muricatum, can produce 5,500 kilograms per individual per year. For my fellow Americans, that's over 12,000 pounds or over 6 tons of sand every year per individual fish. Now, granted, not all the sand that parrotfish produce originated as rocks or corals. Sometimes parrotfish eat algae that's just growing on sand, so they eat sand that they then poop out later as sand. But still, even if a quarter of all the sand that these big boys produce came from corals and rocks, that's still over 1.5 tons of newly created sand every fish produces every year. And this sand doesn't just settle at the bottom of the ocean floor. No, their poop builds islands. A study showed that this one island in the Maldives, the island of Vikaru? I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that, was mostly made up of sand that came from parrotfish. I don't know how they figured that out because I tried to read this paper and I just didn't understand it, but that's not because of me. It's because this paper was written by geologists. And I got beef with geologists. They think they're so smart with their rocks. But I know what they are. I know what they truly are. They're all just a bunch of ne'er-do-wells. Did you know that some geologists think that, like, methane and hydrogen gas is water? I'm not even kidding. It's absolutely absurd. Go watch my video about it. But again, after you're done watching this one. Now, I just want to be clear about a couple things. We don't know if every single beautiful white sand beach in the entire world is made up of parrotfish poop. That would be impossible to determine. But if you are standing on a beach and you know there's both a coral reef and parrotfish out there in the ocean, because you need both, and the reef and the parrotfish have been there for a really long time, then you're probably standing on parrotfish poop. If you're standing on a beach and you know there isn't a coral reef or parrotfish out there, then you're standing on sand that came from who knows where. I mean, geologists probably know, but again, they're all ne'er-do-wells. Also, I keep saying that this sand is parrotfish poop, but I'm just saying that because it's funny. It's not actually poop. It did pass through an animal's digestive system, but this sand is not fecal matter full of illness-causing microbes. It's just sand. It's just ground up rocks and corals. It isn't a health hazard to go frolicking on beautiful white sand beaches that you know came from parrotfish. Just wanted to make that clear. Anyway, so during this part of the video, some of you might have been like, hey, wait, you keep saying that parrotfish eat coral. That sounds bad. They probably shouldn't do that, which is a fair thought. Coral reefs are very important to ecosystems that are home to thousands of different organisms, and they haven't been doing too well in recent years. So, you know, fish that go around munching on them probably aren't helping things. But we do know that on healthy reefs, parrotfish are actually pretty important. Little tiny baby corals aren't born attached to a rock already. They're born out in the open water as little plankton and then settle on a rock somewhere. But if there's already something growing on all the rocks, like algae really likes to grow on rocks, then there's no place for the little baby coral to settle. So for healthy coral reefs, it's worth it for the adult corals to get some chunks taken out of them by parrotfish, because parrotfish are also clearing space for their babies. With unhealthy coral reefs, though, it's a little unclear. There just hasn't been a ton of research into this. All I was basically able to find is that big parrotfish like this guy, Bulbo, Belbo, Bilbo, whatever his name is, there was a worry that big parrotfish like him would cause even more damage to unhealthy coral reefs. They just eat eat so much coral every year that they have to be making everything much, much worse. Or at least that was the hypothesis, but that hasn't been observed in the real world. Big boy parrotfish aren't usually found around unhealthy coral reefs because they've been overfished. And the remaining species of parrotfish are usually much smaller, and they don't tend to bite on corals nearly as much as their larger brethren do. But that's about all I could find. If I had to wager a guess, I would assume that parrotfish that munch a lot on corals are probably bad for unhealthy coral reefs. But the solution wouldn't be to get rid of all the parrotfish. The solution would be to get the coral reef healthy enough so that it can handle getting chewed on by parrotfish. Like, one reason a lot of coral reefs aren't doing well is in part because of overfishing. Taking out more fish is definitely not going to help. So that was all the easy stuff about parrotfish. Where they live and their poop. Everything else about parrotfish was an absolute nightmare to research. If I ever get sleep paralysis, I know my demon isn't going to be some Slender Man looking monster. It's going to just be a giant pile of parrotfish research. It is a miracle I was able to write this script at all, because there were days when my brain was so fried after researching parrotfish that I literally could not speak a complete sentence. I would say about 3 or 4 words, and then my brain would be like, I'm sorry, we don't have the bandwidth to complete that sentence. Please come back later. I'm not even kidding. I have friends who witnessed me like this. Even looking up the taxonomy of parrotfish was way more complicated than it should have been. So whenever I start working on a new video, the first thing I always do is I look up the taxonomy of the organism that the video is about, what phylum, order, class, etc. that they're a part of. And this is usually one of the first things I do for a video because it's easy. There's this website called the World Register of Marine Species, or WORMS, and they have, as near as I can tell, the most up-to-date taxonomic information about all the organisms that live in the ocean, which is incredibly impressive. And also very handy. And all you need to do is go to their website, type in the name of the animal, and bam, up pops their taxonomy. Simple. Easy. So according to WORMS, the taxonomy of parrotfish is as follows. Phylum Chordata, subphylum Vertebrata, gigaclass Actinopterygii, class Teleostii, family Labridae, subfamily Scaridae. And there you go, that's where the parrotfish are. By the way, the Labridae family is the family of the wrasses, which means parrotfish are a type of wrasse too. Something to keep in mind, but yeah, cool, I thought I was done with taxonomy. So I quickly moved on to reading scientific papers about parrotfish, only to notice a huge contradiction. All of these articles were saying that parrotfish were part of Scaridae, a regular family that was separate from the wrasses. And that immediately threw me off. I was like, am I even researching the right animals? I thought they were Scarinae with an N. Why is everyone calling them Scaridae? What's happening here? What's going on? I'm confused. Fortunately, it didn't take me that long to figure it out. Basically, what happened was, for decades, people thought that parrotfish were in the family Scaridae and separate from the wrasses, but then more recent genetic analyses revealed that no, parrotfish are actually within the wrasses in the subfamily Scarinae. So all the papers that were written before this discovery was made obviously says that parrotfish are all part of the family Scaridae. And I know this isn't very exciting to hear about, but I'm telling you this because it's an omen of what is to come. I was so naive. I remember thinking to myself, oh, that was an annoying little hiccup in my research, but it's okay. You're always going to hit a hiccup or two when researching, and I just hit one of mine early. I was naive. I was a fool. I had no idea what was coming for me, because next up was the fossil history of parrotfish. And again, this is usually a very straightforward thing to research. I just go to the Paleobiology database, which is this database that has records of, I assume, everything that we have a fossil history of. Also very impressive and very handy. And again, this is supposed to be extremely straightforward. I just type in the name of the animal, and then I click here, and then I click here, and boom. Okay, so the oldest fossils we have of parrotfish are from 56 to 48.07 million years ago. Now, all I need to do was find a picture of these fossils, and y'all, I had to dig through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 papers to find a picture. This one. But what sucks about this picture is that the researchers who found this fossil aren't even that confident that it came from a parrotfish. But I don't care. The taxonomy and the fossil history of an animal is supposed to only take me about 60 seconds, but it instead took me over 2 hours. So I'm throwing it on my fossil timeline anyway. And I should probably add some asterisks to note that the fossils shown here might not be parrotfish fossils. My goodness, this timeline is a mess. Never use this as a resource if you're doing research of your own. It is a terrible source of information. Anyway, then came the mucus envelopes. Oh, the mucus envelopes. Okay, so when night falls, some species of parrotfish will go find a nice little spot on a rock or a coral and will then produce a bunch of mucus that comes out of their mouth and then moves back over their body until they're completely enveloped in it. This mucus cocoon is very transparent. It's hard to see unless sediment or dust has settled on it, and it's surprisingly thick. Depending on the size of the parrotfish, it can be several centimeters thick. There's a little flap in front of the parrotfish's mouth so it can breathe, and another flap at the back where exhaled water can escape. And the mucus itself is pretty solid. It's apparently very easy to pick up with your bare hands. It can take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours for a parrotfish to make themselves a mucus envelope, and once they're done, they just sleep in it. Some parrotfish spend every night sleeping inside of a giant snot bubble. Sounds like me when my allergies are really bad. This is pretty unusual behavior for fish. Most fish don't create mucus cocoons every night to sleep in, so when researchers first saw parrotfish do this, they got really worried that the parrotfish were sick, which I thought was kind of sweet. And apparently, if two parrotfish are leaning against each other, they will produce one cocoon that they share, which I also thought was sweet. Now, all of that was really easy to find out. The what of mucus cocoons was not difficult to research, but what was difficult to research was the how. How do parrotfish make their mucus sheaths? Nope, not using that again. That sounds gross. Because all I could basically find were the same handful of sentences over and over again across different papers describing how parrotfish build their mucus cocoons. Some variation of the mucus envelope first develops at the mouth of the parrotfish, then moves in folds towards the posterior end of the fish until it is completely enveloped. And that was it, which is nothing. That tells us nothing. Moves in folds? What does that even mean for something to move in folds? How do parrotfish cough up mucus that moves back over their body? That doesn't happen to me when I cough up mucus. And I really tried, y'all, to find a paper with more details, but all I could find were these two articles, one from the 1950s and one from the 1970s, that tried to watch parrotfish make their cocoons, but because it was the 1950s and the 1970s, they did it in a really janky way. Parrotfish won't make their cocoons if there's too much light. So the researchers, both from the 50s and the 70s, placed parrotfish in tanks and then would just shut off all the lights in their lab for like 5 minutes, and then switch them back on for 10 seconds, and then switch them off for 5 minutes, and then back on for 10 seconds, and they just kept doing that until the parrotfish finished making their cocoon, and then wrote down what they saw, which again was basically nothing. From the 1950s paper, quote, "The mucus envelope started as a fold at the mouth and went backward to surround the body of the fish completely." And from the 1970s paper, quote, "The process of envelope formation and the completed envelope appeared identical with those described by Wynne, 1955. Wynne is the guy who wrote the 1950s paper. The envelope developed first at the anterior end of the fish and progressed backward in folds to surround the body." Which is like, okay, I'm not trying to hate on these papers too much. The researchers were very limited by the technology of their era, but like, it's 2026 now. Surely we have cameras that are sensitive enough to record a parrotfish in a dark lab. Someone record a parrotfish in a dark lab, please. I need to know what it looks like when it builds itself a snot bubble bed. It's driving me crazy. For a long time, people have said that parrotfish make their mucus cocoons to protect themselves from being eaten by predators, but there really isn't great evidence to back that claim up. It comes from this one study from 1959, and they didn't set up the experiment very well. They took two different species of parrotfish, one that did produce a mucus envelope and one that didn't, and watched how many got eaten by moray eels. But they really should have added another cohort to the experiment, parrotfish who produce mucus cocoons, but then the researchers should have removed them from the cocoons after they were produced and watched to see if that had any effect on which parrotfish the moray eels ate. Also, the moray eels did eat most of the uncocooned parrotfish, but they also ate a lot of the cocooned ones too. So I don't know, I don't buy this conclusion. I'm not convinced that parrotfish make their snot capsules to protect themselves against predators. Side note, the vibes around this paper were all off. There's one point where the researchers, just out of nowhere, inform us that they have in their possession a blinded moray eel. And I was like, what? Blinded? Where did you get a blinded moray eel? There's no way you found one in the wild. The odds of that are so small. How is it blinded? Oh God, did you guys blind it? And then later, they were talking about how some of the parrotfish they had in captivity just stopped making mucus envelopes one night. And the researchers were like, this was probably due to starvation. Starvation? Why are the animals in your lab starving? Why aren't you feeding them? Feed your animals! What is wrong with you? I have never read such a sinister paper before. The 1950s, y'all. I'm gonna assume that we didn't have really robust animal welfare regulations yet. Maybe we had them around mammals, but I doubt we had anything around fish. Anyway, a much more thorough and humane study was done on parrotfish decades later that pretty definitively proved that the mucus envelopes protect parrotfish from gnathid attacks. Gnathiid attacks? Gnathiid attacks. I don't know how to pronounce this word. Gnathids are parasitic isopods that will suck the blood of fish and sometimes even pass bloodborne illnesses to them. And parrotfish that have a mucus cocoon are way less likely to get bitten by a gnathid than parrotfish who are removed from their mucus cocoon. See, these researchers did it right. Also, I just want to add, I'm not saying that mucus envelopes don't protect parrotfish from predators. They could, but the only paper that studied this did it poorly, and so I don't find their evidence convincing. If someone else decides to rerun this experiment more robustly, then I'd probably be more inclined to agree with their conclusion. But if you do, please don't blind any moray eels or starve any parrotfish. Good God. So after I was done researching their cocoons, I then researched what were easily the most convoluted topics about parrotfish: their sex and their mating habits. That sounds like I'm being repetitive. When I say sex, I mean like male and female, not sex as in mating. And I don't even know where to start with this. The way parrotfish handle both of these things is... oh my God. Just look at all these words I had to learn to understand parrotfish. Haremic, lek-like, polygony, protogeny, monandric, diandric, gonochorism, terminal phase, initial phase, primary male, secondary male, and definitely a bunch of others I can't remember. Because parrotfish gotta be so extra about everything, and I'm just so exhausted already. Ugh. Maybe before I get into this, I should just go lie down on the floor for a moment. How am I going to organize all this? It's so complicated. Oh my God. How can I not be good at explaining this? I've been a science communicator on YouTube for almost 5 years. You think this would come easy. But no, it's not. It's just not. What am I going to do? Whatever, it's fine. I'm just going to lie down on the floor. I'm sure that will fix everything. Okay, so to begin, almost all parrotfish change their sex. And we've talked about fish that changed their sex on this channel before, with clownfish. Go check out my video about them here when you're done with this one. But clownfish are actually a little bit odd in the fish world in that they're protandrous, which means they start out male and then eventually become female. And protandry isn't anywhere near as common in the fish world as protogeny, which is what parrotfish are. All parrotfish are born female, then once they reach a certain size, they switch over to being male. We stan our trans kings. All these males are considered secondary males because they were females first and then males second. Remember this, because I got a question for y'all in a minute. Parrotfish also change color as they changed their sex, and are labeled as initial phase females and terminal phase males. IP female parrotfish are called initial phase because for the first or initial part of their life, they're kind of boring to look at. They have drab color combinations of like gray, brown, and black. Meanwhile, TP male parrotfish are called terminal phase because for the second, or I guess terminal phase of their life, they're very much not boring to look at, as they have gaudy color combinations, like green, red, blue, and yellow. It seems kind of dark to call it their terminal phase. Makes it sound like they're dying of cancer or something. But I have a question for you all. Do you think terminal phase males and secondary males are the same thing? It seems like they should be, right? All parrotfish are protogynous. That means they all change their sex from female to male. That means all parrotfish are secondary males. And that means that all terminal phase parrotfish have to be male, right? Wrong! These words are not synonyms of each other, and I kept getting so confused because it seemed like they should be. But all these papers would talk about secondary males and TP males as two separate concepts, but wouldn't explain why. And it was driving me to madness because they should have been using these words interchangeably, but they weren't. Why? 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 Someone explain why. What is the difference between secondary males and terminal phase males? Clearly, all the parrotfish researchers knew, and they just assumed that everyone who was reading their papers also knew, so why bother wasting time writing out an explanation? Not realizing that a random octopus would one day be completely crashing out because she just wanted an explanation to a simple question that no one was willing to give her. But then I figured it out. Initial phase males. So you know that general rule about parrotfish being protogynous? Yeah, there are exceptions to that. Some parrotfish species have primary males, or males that are born male and stay that way their entire lives. But they start out with the drab, boring initial phase coloration like the females until they reach a certain size, and then they switch to the bright, gaudy terminal phase coloration. But even that has exceptions. Some species of of parrotfish stay the same colors for their entire life. And there is even one species of parrotfish where the females switch to bright coloration once they get big enough. There aren't just terminal phase males, there is at least one terminal phase female too. But that's off topic. Here's the point. Here's the answer to the question. What is the difference between a secondary male and a terminal phase male? It has to do more with how humans label things than with the actual biology of parrotfish, but you use terms like primary and secondary males when talking about how these fish changed their sex. You use terms like initial phase and terminal phase when you're just talking about parrotfish coloration. Like, okay, this right here is a parrotfish in its terminal phase. We know that because it's brightly colored. Is it a male? Probably, given that there's only one known species of parrotfish that has terminal phase females. Now, is it a primary or secondary male? We don't know. We don't know if this fish started out as a female and then it changed, or if it's been male its whole life. If it started female and then switched, it would be a secondary male in its terminal phase. If it has been male its whole life, it would be a primary male in its terminal phase. Primary and secondary have to do with sex changes. Initial phase and terminal phase has to do with coloration. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. Now, at this point in my research, I got thrown another curveball. I still thought that all female parrotfish eventually switched to being male, but then I found a paper that said they didn't. Some female parrotfish stay female for their entire lives too. So that whole general rule that all parrotfish are definitely protogynous? Lies. It's all lies. And I, of course, in my foolishness, couldn't just accept that about parrotfish. Oh no, I had to go find out why some female parrotfish stay female forever. And I discovered that in order to make sense of this, I needed to understand how parrotfish mate. And oh my god, how they mate. No, I already had my crash out. I had my one allotted crash out. That's it. Get it together, octopus lady. Get it together. Okay, so to start, I guess, some parrotfish do group spawning. That's when a bunch of parrotfish all come together in a group and they all release their gametes into the open water. Gametes are reproductive cells, by the way, so eggs in females and sperm in males. Then all the eggs get fertilized in the water and sometime later a bunch of baby parrotfish are born. But pair spawning has been seen in every species of parrotfish that has been studied, and it comes in two different kinds of social systems. There's a heremic and lek-like. The heremic social system is like a harem, hence its name. So individual males carve out a piece of permanent territory for themselves and then mate with the females from that territory. The males are called harem masters, which I hate that, it sounds gross, and they will mate in pairs with their females who have organized themselves into a social hierarchy based on their size. And the same thing happens in pair spawning as does group spawning, except it happens with just two parrotfish. The female releases her eggs, the male releases his sperm, and boom, fertilized eggs. Then there is the lek-like social system, which is named after leks, which is like a bird thing. Leks are something that birds do. Instead of having permanent territory, male parrotfish will leave the reef every day to establish temporary territories in deeper water. And then female parrotfish will swim through this mating arena and mate with whoever she finds attractive. At the end of the day, the males return to the reef. Here's the thing about pair spawning, though. It doesn't always result in one male parrotfish and one female parrotfish getting together. Sometimes there's a third party involved, another male called a streaker male. Streaker males will hang out near parrotfish couples, and when the female and male release their gametes into the water, he will come streaking in and release his own sperm, and then skedaddle. Sometimes the streaker male is a bachelor who has no territory of his own and is just passing through, but sometimes it's a neighboring territorial male, which to me seems rude. Bruh, you got your own territory and your own harem. Stop being so greedy. Anyway, this is called sperm competition. Sperm from different males have to compete with each other to fertilize the eggs of the female. Now, earlier, when I was talking about haremic parrotfish, I briefly mentioned that there's the dominant male, and then all the females in his harem fall into a social hierarchy based on size, with the largest female being second in command after the dominant male. But something interesting happens if the male gets removed from the group. Those who have seen my clownfish video already might be guessing, oh, the largest female must switch their sex and become the dominant male, just like how the largest male clownfish will switch his sex if the dominant female in his social group is removed. And you would be right! In a different reality where parrotfish aren't constantly giving the middle finger to previously established scientific principles, because that is not what happens with some dominant female parrotfish. Instead, she stays the same and a smaller female switches and becomes male. And this has to do with something called size fecundity skew in combination with sperm competition. This sounds complicated, but just stick with me. So fecundity is basically the measurement of reproductive success in an animal. Now let's pretend for a second that there is a harem of parrotfish, and the male just got taken out. Let's also say the largest female parrotfish of this group has 100 eggs inside of her, while the total number of eggs across all the other females in the harem amount to about 200 eggs. It would be beneficial for the female to switch to being male, because by doing so, she can potentially produce 200 children, as opposed to 100 if she stayed female. Now, let's pretend that the total number of eggs in all the other females amounts not to 200, but to 50. Well, if she switches to male, she can only produce 50 children, so it's just not worth it to switch. Add in streaker males, and the benefit to switching to male decreases even more. In some species of parrotfish, 30% of all pair spawning gets interrupted by a streaker male, so the large female in this scenario will end up with even less than 50 children. Meanwhile, a smaller female within this group with, say, 25 eggs would benefit a lot from switching to male, because now, with the large female and all the smaller ones, there are 125 eggs she can successfully fertilize with her sperm, and even if 30% of those spawning events results in no eggs getting fertilized by her, she's still ending up with way more children than if she stayed female. Now, I made up these numbers just to keep things simple. Fish produce way more than like a couple dozen eggs per female, and that's especially true with parrotfish. The number of eggs in a female parrotfish increases exponentially with her size, so the benefits of switching to male drops so fast and so dramatically the bigger a female gets. So that's why some females stay female their whole life. Now, if any of you just watched this whole section about parrotfish reproduction and was like, I don't know, that wasn't too difficult to understand, Octopus Lady, I don't know why you were freaking out about it earlier, that's actually flattering to hear, because that means I did a good job explaining all this. But at the same time, you shut your mammalian mouth, because it was not laid out all nice like this to me. Oh no! For weeks, I could not get a general overview of parrotfish mating habits like I just presented to you. All I could find were accounts of how individual species of parrotfish reproduced, and they all seemed to contradict each other, because I didn't realize that they all mated differently from each other. I'd read one paper that'd say, like other parrotfish, this species exclusively pair spawns. And then I'd read another paper that'd say, this species of parrotfish group spawns. And then there was there was one species of parrotfish that displayed multiple different mating behaviors, but it all depended on where they lived in the world. Like, this species of parrotfish does haremic spawning in Panama, lek-like spawning in Puerto Rico, and group spawning in Jamaica. But they also sometimes do group spawning across all these areas, and the females in a group spawn will sometimes get enticed to mate with a male who has a harem, so she'll stop and mate with him before moving on with the group, which, I don't know, that seems kind of lek-like too. Do you see how confusing this is? It wasn't until I found this blessed article from a guy named Ronald E. Thresher, who did summarize parrotfish mating habits in a nice, concise way. And may every ocean god that has ever existed bless this man, because before I found his writing, I was weeping in front of a bulletin board with a bunch of parrotfish and string pinned to it, trying to figure out all this on my own, because parrotfish don't know how to keep things simple. Not that that's their fault. A lot of issues I had with parrotfish wasn't because they're actually confusing, but because a lot of research done around them is bad or poorly archived. So that's the fault of humans and not parrotfish. And even the stuff that is confusing about them still isn't their fault, because they didn't choose to be this confusing. They just evolved to be that way. And honestly, this is what makes nature worth studying. This is why biology is so fascinating, is the wild variation between living things. Also, you can't not love parrotfish. Look at them. Look at their doofy little grins. They sometimes look like they just told you a stupid joke and they're waiting for you to laugh. And they look like when they do laugh, they go like, yuck. I mean, look at this one. He looks like he has a mustache. Darling little dork. So even though they almost drove me to madness, I don't hate parrotfish. I still really love them, just like every other organism I've covered on my channel. But I am so tired, and I'm gonna go sleep for a week now. I'm gonna go curl up in a kelp bed somewhere. Maybe use a parrotfish and a mucus bubble as a pillow. Oh, but one more thing. If you enjoyed watching me digging through piles of research, then you might enjoy this video by My Wild Backyard, where wildlife biologist Spencer Hoffman digs through the desert in search of the elusive Gila monster. Okay, I know that doesn't sound similar at all, but it's similar in spirit. We both got a little obsessive in our attempts to find something we just really wanted to find. And at least with My Wild Backyard, he got to do really cool stuff, like explore the Arizona desert, which honestly, there's a non-zero chance that I would have become some sort of desert biologist if I didn't love the ocean so much, where he finds all sorts of cool animals, like Maricopa harvester ants and sidewinder snakes. This episode is part of My Wild Backyard's series called Beyond the Backyard, where Spencer tracks down the world's most legendary legendary animals to tell their stories, and can only be watched in one place, and that's over on Nebula. Nebula is a prestige streaming platform where creators like me can create thoughtful, high-quality content for you, with no ads, no annoying algorithms, and a growing library of exclusive content. We have a bunch of other shows you can only watch on Nebula, which we call Nebula Originals, like Tirzu's Let's Play Outside, Joe Scott Presents Mysteries of the Human Body, and Real Science's Becoming Human. Right now, you can use my link, go.nebula.tv/theoctopuslady, to get 50% off an annual subscription, which will cost you only about $2.50 a month. We're also giving a 40% discount on our lifetime subscriptions. They normally go for $500, but they're now available for $300. And with lifetime subscriptions, you only have to pay once, and then you have access to Nebula forever. This is a great way to support me and a ton of other creators like me, plus you get access to exclusive content and a top-tier streaming experience. So head on over to go.nebula.tv/theoctopuslady, or scan this QR code, or go check out my link in the description to sign up for Nebula and watch Beyond the Backyard now. And with that, thanks for watching another episode of Alien Ocean. Special thanks as always to my patrons for directly contributing to my ability to make these kinds of videos. I literally couldn't do this without you. If you'd like to support me, you can sign up for my Patreon over at patreon.com/theoctopuslady, where you can get early access to videos and or your name in the beautiful credits. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood octopus lady reminding you that you don't have to go into space to find aliens.